What do you genuinely not understand? Having a chat to another dad at my son's soccer, turns out he is an engineer working on satellites. The more he spoke about space, the less I understood. One thing he said that really stood out is that space is the closest frontier, and that the ISS is only 400 kilometers from Earth. Being told how close space is destroyed everything I had assumed about space. https://www.google.com/search?Tom+sign sellers+sign understanding+sign space+sign PDF. Very approachable book on space and satellites. It reads like a high school sophomore level book, but has surprisingly useful stuff in there. Like if you work backwards from the how to design a satellite chapter, you can pretty much guess what exactly any satellite in space is doing, how well it does it, how often. All from a single photo. You said please explain. Okay, briefly. I have a computer. You have a computer. We connect our computers to a giant interconnected grid that allows us to communicate. We each get an address on that grid. You tell me your grid address and that if I go there, you have a picture I can see. I point my computer at your address, and the grid is used to communicate the picture to me. This is the Internet. Advanced topics. DNS. So I don't have to remember your complicated numeric address. Protocol, language/rules/communication procedures our computers will communicate in. Routing, grid is a mess. How does my address find a path to your address? NAT, main reason your home router exists. We ran out of grid addresses, so we divided them public and private. NAT makes the Internet like a grid of apartment buildings, one public address that is on the global grid, on your router, but each device on your home network, individual apartment units, gets a private address. Try sending mail to Unit 24B, a private address, ain't happening. But, mail to 123 East Main Street Unit 24B works fine. Now you only need one public address to represent your 50 devices. And, that is the explanation you specifically asked not to give. Sound can travel through cables by being converted into electrical signals. This is done more or less by having a magnet placed by some wires such that the pressure waves, sound, vibrates the magnet. Motion of a magnetic field creates an electric field that can move electrons through a wire. This is called induction, and it is the fundamental physical behavior that underlies a vast amount of technologies from communication to electric motors/generators. Sound can travel through the Internet by similar means, but instead of it directly going through the cables, it is first converted into a digital representation via various analog to digital conversion devices. Then, as in all things going through the Internet, the information is encoded into signals that represent combinations of ones and zeros. There are a few ways to encode digital information, but that can get a bit complicated for just a Reddit comment. Edit, more info. As for a wireless network, it's the same as sending electrical signals through a wire, but now you're encoding the ones and zeros into an electromagnetic wave that can travel through the vacuum of space instead of a purely electrical one that travels only through a wire. You know how individual letters don't have much meaning in and of themselves? but when you put them together you get words which have meaning, and you put words together and that creates sentences. That's how software works. You take smaller bits of data and put it together in a format that makes it possible to transfer more data than the smaller letters. If you understand the format, or in this analogy, the language, you can communicate more efficiently because you know how to decode those letters. We call this abstraction. And basically we build more and more abstractions until it's fairly trivial to communicate comments like this. And have your computer read what I wrote? The person who wrote the software you're running doesn't think in terms of 1s and 0s. They think about sending messages. And much in the same way a novelist tells a story, they're thinking about how to convey an idea, not the letters that make up the paragraph. What you want to hear, YOLO weekly $TQQQ calls. The correct answer, education. My degree has had a higher ROI than any of my portfolios and enabled me to make money to use to make more money. That or be born rich LOL. Edit. By education I don't mean just college. Stuff like online courses, boot camps, and certifications count too. Every atom just has a little magnetic field, and when they're all pointing in the same direction it all adds up to a big magnetic field. In most materials they point randomly, so there's no overall field. So why do atoms have magnetic fields? Because magnetic fields are created by moving electrons, and atoms have electrons orbiting them. Electromagnets are actually just coils of wire pushing electrons around in circles. Atoms also have electrons going in circles, basically, around them. Why does moving electrons create a magnetic field? I'm not sure anyone has any fucking clue. They just pull on each other when they're moving for some reason, and magnets fundamentally remain a mystery. The economy, as in I understand everything hypothetically, but have no clue how I'm going to implement my knowledge. Yet I know how a mortgage works, and I know how taxes work, but what do I do? Just go to the bank and say, "One mortgage please." I just feel like I'm missing something about the real world, and since I'm 17, I'm only a couple years off it. I just feel like I'm missing something about the real world, and since I'm 17, I'm only a couple years off it. I felt exactly the same way at your age. There is no magic knowledge behind any of it. For a mortgage, you call up a bank and ask how you get a mortgage. That's it. When you rent your first place, to get the electricity in your name, your bills sent to you, you just call up the electricity company and say you moved and ask how you get started. To pay your taxes, you read the instructions. There is also an IRS helpline, if you're American. You can also hire someone for not much money to do it for you. Nothing happens when you become an adult where you suddenly have any answers. You just ask for answers when you encounter a new situation. You'll never stop coming across new situations. How do you get a wedding venue? You call up places and ask. How do you clean the umbilical cord site on a newborn? Ask the nurses at the hospital or the pediatrician. How do you sign your kid up for school? Call up and ask. How do you sign up to start a retirement account? Call up and ask. How do you get your Medicare and Social Security, or your country's equivalent, when you're old? There will be a number. Call up and ask. Nobody will think you're dumb and should know better. Literally everyone in all of these situations had a point where they didn't know the answer. You'll be the millionth person to ask, making you just like everyone else. The real world is just a bunch of people who don't have all the answers. There are places that offer psychological testing. I have long suspected, but my doctor and previous therapist thought my symptoms might have been from sleep deprivation, which can cause symptoms very similar to ADHD, and so I did a sleep study first, and found out I have sleep apnea. So that settled it for a while. Fast forward about 6 years. On our pediatrician's recommendation, we got my daughter tested. During the diagnostic process, I realized that I was answering the questions for myself with the same answer I was giving for my daughter, so I talked it over with my current doctor and therapist, and they recommended I get tested. I didn't have to get a formal referral at the place I went to. The process was simple. I went into their office for about 5 hours and did a battery of tests. Some were to measure IQ, some were like the Rorschach, ink blot test, and then a few Lugum questionnaires. That was basically it. My daughter's was similar but comprised of 4 shorter sessions over the course of a month. Be sure to check with your insurance, if applicable, because they did cover a significant amount of the cost for both of us. Good luck, friend. Appreciate it. So you basically did a walk-in to a psychiatrist? I'm kinda strapped for money at the moment, but I'm sure they have clinics or programs that can help. I'm down for going the quickest route possible. Also, it's interesting how these traits can be passed down genetically. My ex got my son tested and he was diagnosed with ADHD. When you received treatment, I assume prescription medication, how did your perception of reality change for you? Did you finally regain some normalcy in your life? Not the person you're responding to, but the way I explained it to my psychiatrist is to imagine I'm not medicated and reading a book with small font and margins. When I read, it's like I'm too worried about the words ahead or below and not the words I should be reading. When I'm medicated, I can actually hone in on those words and keep my focus to the point where I'm not rereading that sentence again. Oh, just wait until you have sleep deprivation and AD/ADHD. I was diagnosed with AD as a young kid, late 90s, early 2000s, but the meds at the time fucked me up more than helped, so my parents decided to quit with my input as well. Thanks mom and dad, y'all are the best, and I just coped. Forward to me getting a night shift job. 30 fucking years old, responsible, completed a 4-year degree on my own. Couldn't handle night shift. Less than a year in and I was literally losing my shit. TLDR, AD plus sleep deprivation equals mental breakdown very quickly. The universe. Either it always existed, which is a thermodynamic nightmare which makes no sense because how can a chain of events not have a start, or it did have a start, which is preposterous because time, space-time, is a product of expansion. There literally was no before the Big Bang because there was no time to have a point in to call before. Ontologically, one of these statements has to be at least nominally true, but both are fucking bananas. You might try just opening one short algebra book after another and have them all open on the table in front of you, and spend months staring at all of them. You might surprise yourself and find something that speaks to you, and then once you understand it one way, then you start to understand the other books more. It depends on how you learn, but I think the math brain thing is a myth. A lot of times people just struggle with struggling, because they've never had to struggle to understand logical systems and abstractions. Learning sucks if you take it seriously. You're not dumb. If you understand money, you understand elementary algebra at a fundamental level. You may just not realize it. Say it costs $5 for 10 apples. You could represent that by saying 5D equals 10A. Solving for D is just figuring out how many apples $1 will buy, divide both sides by 5. Solving for A is just figuring out how much a single apple costs, divide both sides by 10. The rest just builds on that. Suppose you want to make a bench. Each leg needs 2 bolts, 2 nuts, and 4 washers. You have 4 legs total. How many of all of them do you need? Now what if the bolts are 25 cents, the nuts are 15 cents, and the washers are 10 cents? What will all of that cost? Now if we throw in a 10% tax with a 10% discount, will the price change? If you can answer that, you just did algebra. X, Y, Z are just filler terms for literally anything. 2 reasons. 1. A whole lot of people never got out of their teenage "you can't tell me what to do" phase, and now it's their whole identity. The second reason is that people don't like being inconvenienced. Just look at what happens when someone cuts you off in traffic or is late to an appointment. Instant rage. Put those together and you have a recipe for millions of unnecessary deaths. If you want a bonus, throw in that people want to feel special and in the know, so conspiracy theories about government mind control or whatever play right into that. Something sheeple. That's probably true for a lot of them. But I do have friends with loud cars who try to keep them quiet when in neighborhoods so they don't disturb the neighbors, but even then it's not exactly silent. The folks who just rev it up everywhere, including neighborhoods at night? Definitely inconsiderate assholes. Those are the guys who ruin car meets, because all they do is rev out their motors, do donuts, and blast tasteless music until the cops are called and shut the car meet down. My friend works at a halfway house where people regularly smear shit on the walls in the bathroom. When I first heard that, I thought, wow, they sound like the worst people in the world. But the people who work at the halfway house are generally pretty sanguine about the whole regularly having shit smeared on the walls in the bathroom thing. The reason is because, apparently, when a human is really stressed out, like well beyond their breaking point, they often respond by desperately trying to exert some kind of control over their environment. At the halfway house, where the junkies have completely lost control of their lives, they poop in their hand and smear the shit on the walls because it's the only thing nobody can stop them from doing. They're allowed to be alone in the bathroom. Nobody can stop them from having their own shit. So on the walls it goes. The last, most desperate, most pathetic assertion of the only kind of power they perceive they have left, pointlessly aimed at the staff of the halfway house. People who drive a loud car through a neighborhood aren't hitting rock bottom like that, but they're lashing out in a similar way. They probably feel helpless and scared and angry in a very broad, systemic way. If they didn't make their car go vrrr and annoy everyone, they would need to impotently express control in some other way. It's a cry for help from someone who is unfortunately afraid or incapable of expressing their frustration in a healthier way. I don't understand why a lot of kids are taught to blindly respect adults just because they're older. Anyone can be an asshole, it doesn't matter how many years they've avoided dying. I got scolded for talking back to some asshole I live near, because he's an adult and I'm a child, but that doesn't make it okay for him to have been an asshole in the first place. If you want respect, then don't be a dick. It's a simple concept.